What is it about? Is it because all the good news has been factored in already in the Chinese market?
A lot of good news is in the price in China. China's valuations are looking pretty rich compared with the rest of the region. Another factor is where China is positioned in the economic cycle and the recovery from the pandemic. China was, of course, one of the first markets in Asia and globally to recover from the pandemic, along with Taiwan, which means that the fastest growth is already behind it. Whereas you have a number of other markets in Asia, India and Australia, I'd also include Korea in there, that are just entering into the fastest part of their recovery. And that's really where you want to be positioned right now.
Dan, there are also concerns that perhaps the PBOC is pulling in on its stimulus. What are you seeing and what are you expecting for the rest of the year?
I'm not too worried about the PBOC. It actually never provided as much stimulus as, say, some of the other major global central banks. I'm a bit more concerned on the fiscal side. There we're likely to see more of a contraction in fiscal stimulus than on the monetary side. We think that perhaps fiscal policy could be tightened by about 2% of GDP, which would be fairly significant.
And then you upgraded India. What's changed? Has it got to do with the recently announced budget?
That's definitely part of the story. And that budget is part of a bigger story, which is that there's been more fiscal space created for the central government due to good tax intake. That presents the government with an opportunity to provide fiscal stimulus, which it really wasn't doing much of at all last year. Other factors, though, as I mentioned, India, we think, is coming into the best part of its recovery from the pandemic. We think that growth is going to be quite rapid this year. Other factors are that the earnings are looking very good. We're seeing very strong upward revisions from the street as far as EPS forecasts for this year. India also has a good story on interest rate cuts. Interest rates are still very high in India. If inflation starts to go the right way in India, we could see some pretty significant rate cuts.
Dan, hasn't all that good news been really priced into the Indian market, given the record highs we've been witnessing of late?
India, on the face of it, looks a bit expensive if you just take the current level of earnings, but we think that there's going to be a lot more in the way of upward revisions to earnings in India than in other markets. And at the end of the year, I think that the valuations that you get in India won't be the same as the valuations that you're seeing right now. They'll be looking a bit better.
So, you know, with that and looking at elsewhere, I think because we just had the Open in Bangkok, so let me just ask you a little bit about Thailand. And you're suggesting at the moment that an economic recovery looks far away or too far away to really be dabbling in that market. Tell us about your thesis.
Well, I don't see the tourist economy reopening in Thailand until really probably 1Q of next year at the earliest, and in a very strong way, that is. And it's hard to see Thailand performing until we get close to that tourism reopening. The problem is that the Thai public is very resistant to reopening to tourism. And then there are all sorts of other problems with slow vaccine rollouts in other places, China being the #1 tourism market for Thailand, and the vaccination rollout there is quite slow, which will slow the return of Chinese tourists to Thailand.
Right, I just want to go off a bit left field here and just ask you what the impact is of this relief package, if it gets passed by Joe Biden, on the Asia Pacific and Asian equities very quickly.
It's pure good for Asia. Asia is very growth-oriented. When global growth is doing well, Asia tends to do well both in absolute terms and relative to global equities. This package is going to be very positive for global and Asian growth. I think it's a very positive development, and we should be hoping that President Biden gets as much of that package through Congress as is possible.